This is just the craziest thing to me. Rents go up over time. Real estate is not a get-rich-quick program. Stop making it a get-rich-quick program. It's a get-rich-for-sure program.
Welcome to another episode of The Financially Free Investor, where you will learn information and strategies on how to become financially independent by investing in real estate, something that is not taught openly in our society today. Financial freedom matters so you can live a bigger life, retire early, and do what matters most to you. Get ready to hear tried and true methods to becoming financially free with your host, Jordy Clark.
Hey everyone, welcome into another episode of the Financially Free Investor podcast. Whew. All right, well, today I wanted to talk to you guys about one thing that's near and dear to my heart. And if most of you guys have been listening to this, if you are not from Utah, if you have no interest in Utah, you can go ahead and probably skip this episode. But I take that back, because I think this principle applies to wherever you're at, wherever you're investing. So we're going to talk 100% on investing in real estate today. And specifically about that, we're going to talk about investing in Salt Lake City. So I'm going to read a bunch of data. It might be a little boring. I'm going to do the best I can to make it make sense, because I think that this is a very important reason why a lot of people invest in Utah. They invest in Salt Lake City. They invest in the Wasatch Front. So let's, without further ado, let's jump into it. So there is the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute, the University of Utah, David Eccles School of Business. They look at a bunch of different stuffs, and I'm a data geek. So, I stumbled across this report titled "The Changing Dynamics of the Wasatch Front Apartment Market." Okay, so here's the interesting thing. Well, I'll kind of read their key findings, and then I want to jump into history and changes in rent. And this is the importance of knowing where you invest and knowing why you invest. Okay, so they kind of talked about housing prices post the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's the interesting thing. As housing prices accelerated to record levels throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, approximately 71% of Utah households were priced out of the median priced home by the spring of 2022, which is interesting because that was almost the peak of the market. The narrowing path to homeownership has increased the demand for rental housing. Shocker there. Everyone needs a place to live, right? Jumping back into it. Renter households across the Wasatch Front experienced as much rental price growth in the 2 years between 2020 and 2022 as they did in the prior 10 years between 2010 and 2020. Isn't that interesting? The increased rent during the 2 years of the pandemic was much faster than in the prior decade. Between 2010 and 2020, asking rents increased at 2.6% annually, compared to 10.5% annually between 2020 and 2022. Rents increased the most in Salt Lake County. Rents increased for all unit types during the pandemic. Salt Lake City leads the county in rental construction. This one's interesting. I'm going to jump in on this. There are approximately 24,249 units under construction across the Wasatch Front. And again, these are just apartment units. Of the 13,957 units under construction in Salt Lake County, 54.3% are in Salt Lake City. Okay, so this is super interesting. Obviously, we've had a huge influx of people coming from different states, but this is the point I want to get to. Over time, as time marches on, rents increase. Okay, so and this is the magic of buying something with a fixed rate mortgage. And certainly a few years ago when interest rates were ultra low, that's what made a lot of sense, right? But as we continue to grow and we've had this big boom and big influx, I think we're going to start to run out of space. We're going to start to run out of places for people to go, and it's going to be interesting to see where rents go. So I'm going to break down a couple different counties and a couple different decades right now. Okay. So in Salt Lake County, in the year 2000, the average asking rent was $804 a month. Okay. Studios were $663, one bedrooms were $700, two bedrooms were $884, three bedrooms were just over $1,000 at $1,028, and four bedroom apartments were $1,363. And the reason I'm geeking out about this is if you own a single family house and someone's renting a 4-bedroom apartment, do you think they'll pay a little bit more to go rent a 4-bedroom house, have their own yard, their kids can run around? Like, obviously, if they're in a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom apartment, they probably have kids, right? They probably have a need for 3 or 4 bedrooms. Most people don't just rent a 4-bedroom apartment and be a single person with nothing else going on, right? So I'm going to assume house rents are maybe a little bit higher than this, okay? So we're going to take out the 2020 to 2022, because if you remember a few minutes ago when I talked about that, they said that 2-year period rents increased the same as they did in a decade, okay? So we're just going to look at 2000 to 2010 and then 2010 to 2020, because that's a 20-year period. And had you bought a house in the year 2000, let's say you didn't make anything, or you made $100 a month, okay? You bought a 4-bedroom house. And we're just going to go with these apartment rents because, hey, it's a little bit more conservative, right? Year 2000, 4-bedroom home, asking rent was $1,363 a month. That tenant is paying your loan down for you. You fast forward 10 years, all of a sudden rent has increased to $1,587 a month. So again, not that big of a deal, but what also happens in that 10 years? Well, your tenant has paid down the mortgage considerably, about a third, maybe a little less than a third. 2010 to 2020, all of a sudden in 2020, your average asking rent was $1,900 a month. So a little bit bigger there. It's compounded, right? But if you look back to 2000, you've got $1,300 a month all the way up to $1,900 a month. It's a pretty big increase when you look at it over 20 years, right? And by the way, if you chose to kind of do maybe the Dave Ramsey method and you just take all of your extra cash flow and, try to pay that loan off, my bet is in 20 years, you probably would have had a paid for rental property thanks to your tenants. And if you bought something that's in pretty good shape in a pretty good area, and the furnace was newer when you bought it, the roof was newer when you bought it, hey, guess what? Those items are probably still in pretty good shape if you took care of it and you took care of your property and just made sure that normal maintenance happened. And now, all of a sudden, in 2020, the median home price was just a hair under $500,000. I think it was like $470,000. And that tenant would have paid that property off for you in 20 years. Had you been disciplined enough to buy it, had you been disciplined enough to keep it rented with good people and keep paying the mortgage, you would have ridden through 2008, 2009, 2010, fast forward all the way to 2020, market rebounded, it was rented the whole time, and by the way, now you're making $1,900 a month, which is just shy of $25,000 a year, right? Which we're kind of going into a gig economy. People are working all these side hustles. You got people driving for Uber. You got people driving for Uber Eats. You got people driving for Instacart, delivering groceries and doing whatever they're doing. And the rich have figured this out. Well, rather than sell your time for money, if you had a rental property, you could make the equivalent of another side hustle without doing much. Okay? Utah County, we're going to look at 4 bedrooms again. On average, in the year 2000, a 4-bedroom apartment was going for $1,435 a month. In 2020, it was going for $2,100 a month, $2,142. So that's a pretty big deal, right? Rent increases. And by the way, the government has printed so much stinking money in the last couple of years that I think that's why we're seeing a big spike in everything, right? We're seeing it, man, like you go get eggs, you go get bacon, you go get whatever, and it's more expensive than it was a couple of years ago. And it's, in my opinion, more a function of the government just creating more money, which if we were all sitting around the Monopoly board playing Monopoly, and instead of every time we pass go, we get $200, all of a sudden we get, call it $400. Well, those properties start looking a lot more desirable. And, people start getting a little freer with their money because every time they pass go, they get $400 instead of $200. Right? And normally we don't see this. Inflation usually sticks right around 2 or 3%, which is, going back to a little bit before, rents increased from 2010 to 2020 about 2.6% annually. So most people aren't going to notice a 3% increase in rent. They're just not. And they're not going to move out over a 3% increase in rent, right? If it's $1,000 a month, that's you go from 1,000 to 1,030. Most people are going to go, yeah, I'll stick around because it's not worth the hassle of moving for $30 a month. And this is the power of owning rental properties, because if the average tenant, and I'm just pulling this figure out of nowhere right now, but let's just say hypothetically the average tenant stays in a single family rental property for 5 years because they don't want to move. They're repairing their credit, they're doing whatever, they're living life, they're working jobs, they're raising babies, they got schools going on, they got PTA things going on, they want to live in a good area, right? You guys get my gist. They stay in there for 5 years. And you just bump it up 3%, 4% a year. All of a sudden, you look out and you would have, from the span of 2 tenants, right? Hypothetically, 5 years each. In 2010, you go 2010 to 2015. Oh, by the way, in 2010, so many people were saying it is a terrible time to buy real estate. Don't buy real estate, right? And granted, like what happened in 2008 was bad, but we had never seen that before as far as all of the shenanigans that were going on with mortgages. Home prices had gone down before in the past. But honestly, here's the magic in owning rental properties. You go through 2 tenants from the year 2010 to 2020. Let's say your mortgage is $1,400 a month on average. You start renting it for $1,600 a month, $1,587. And gradually, you're providing a great place to live for these people. For 5 years, the first tenant stays. Let's say you have to do a few bucks worth of paint touch-ups and whatnot. When they leave, maybe fix a dishwasher, water heater, miscellaneous stuff. And then you get your next tenant in for, call it $1,750 a month. All of a sudden, you're making a few more bucks. And then you fast forward to 2020, they move out, your next tenant moves in for $1,900 a month. So my hope is that as you see, we have less and less land available. We're going to see more and more apartments become available. The single family rental properties are not going anywhere, especially if you can buy in a good area outside of an HOA. You're going to see pretty good rent growth. You're going to see pretty stable tenant bases because it's just going to continue to get more expensive as we build out land, as more people continue to come here. And I'm recording this April 4th, 2023, and it's snowing. We got like a foot of snow last night, which is, I would say, unprecedented. It's not normal, but they don't call it the greatest snow on earth for no reason. Sometimes we get heavy, crazy snowstorms. It's Utah, right? This is not Arizona. This is not Southern California. This is Utah. This is the greatest snow on earth. And so many people come here for the skiing. So this is just the craziest thing to me. Rents go up over time. Real estate is not a get-rich-quick program. Stop making it a get-rich-quick program. It's a get-rich-for-sure program, because you put a tenant in the house. And I mean, if you just think about it this way, you buy one house, good single family house. You get a good family in there. You treat them well. They're going to be there on average 5 years. We've already said that. Well, 30-year mortgage, that's only 6 families moving in and out of that house in 30 years. So when you think about it that way, 6 families can pay for your retirement program while you're giving them a great place to live, right? They can pay that house off for you, which is an asset that you can borrow against, that you can sell, that you can continue to rent out, that you can pay for. You know, I'm young 30s, got young kids. Eventually, I'm going to have to pay for weddings. Eventually, you know, I'm going to have to pay for college. Eventually, well, I'm not going to have to do any of this stuff, but I would like to, right? And here's the point of all of this is, would you rather try to save it all up yourself, or would you rather sacrifice maybe a little bit right now, buy a rental property, maybe use some of that fantastic equity that we have to go out and borrow against your house, because the rate of return of equity is 0. It literally does nothing for you. The bank doesn't send you a letter congratulating you for having more equity and making their loan safer. So you could potentially use some of that equity to go buy a rental property right now. It's a great strategy. And you don't have to sell. You don't have to move. There's so many options. And if all you did was take the cash flow from the rental property and use that to make the payment, I think it's a win over a long period of time. It may not look sexy day one. It may not, you know, cash flow a ton. If you're borrowing from one source of equity to buy another property, but again, it's not get rich quick. It's get rich for sure. And as long as you're buying good properties that, you know, you can always make sure it's rented, it's a relatively safe investment. Now, you got to make sure you've got reserves, and, you know, if tenants don't pay, you have a little bit of a slush fund to make all of that happen. And you know, this isn't financial or investing advice. This is just my experience of seeing rents go up. Like, I remember seeing 3-bedroom houses in Kearns rented for $700-800 a month in 2014. And now they're rented for $1,700-1,800. And so as time marches on and our dollars get worth less, because we're not on the gold standard, we're not backed by anything, we're a fiat currency, which is what it is. Like, every nation out there is on the same program we are. But you just realize that it's a little bit different game than what we were told, from what our parents were told from their parents or their parents, right? You could just go back a few generations, and even just thinking about, you know, if you buy a house and the average family stays there 5 years, over a 30-year mortgage, that's 6 families. So you just think about just a few generations, how much stuff can change. And then layer on top of that our geography. I mean, look around. If you're local here and you can't see a way for us to build further east, a way for us to build further west without crossing a mountain range. Oh, by the way, we've got 2 massive lakes. We have the greatest body of salt water, I think, in the world, or at least North America. Like, the Great Salt Lake is massive, and it's not going anywhere. We can't build on it. At least haven't figured out a way yet. So just think about all of that as you guys think about investing in Salt Lake and the scarcity that will come one day from not having enough land. And we will be forced to go vertical at that point. And for the people who continue to want the normal American experience, which is you live in a house with a backyard, you've got some space for your dog and kids to run, that will only get more and more desirable as we fill up our land, as we start going higher vertically on these apartment complexes, on these office buildings, on everything that's going on. Your single family house will only get more and more valuable as time goes on. So with that being said, that's my rant. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of The Financially Free Investor. If you found value in this episode or know someone who would find value in this information, please share with them, subscribe, and send us a review.